My name is Maya Rivera, and I built a clinic with my own two hands. Not figuratively. I mean literally. Late nights taping down flyers, waking up before dawn to run billing, answering calls at midnight because a new grad therapist didn't know how to read an insurance explanation. For 8 years, I poured every spare hour and every spare dollar into Hearth and Hands physical therapy until it stopped being just a dream and started being people who trusted me with their pain and their recovery. When I say I sacrificed, I mean the kind of small, humiliating things that stick to you. I lived in a one-room apartment for 5 years. The couch was a yard sale find with a cushion that sank like quicksand. My bedside table was a milk crate. I worked double shifts during flu season, then came home and graded CEU lectures until my eyes blurred. I paid off my own 6-figure student loans one paycheck at a time, while also covering tuition and living costs for my sister Lena, because I genuinely believed, that family meant carrying each other across the finish line. People tell you that building something from scratch makes you tougher. They forget to mention it also sharpens the places where you bruise. Hearth and Hands wasn't just a job. It was my proof that the girl who couldn't afford a nice graduation photo had value. It was the thing that let me sleep at night knowing my choices mattered, which made the dinner 3 months ago feel like a slow-motion heist. It was a Sunday. My parents, Evelyn and Mark, arrived with casserole, and that look parents get when they're about to turn a conversation into an earthquake. Lena showed up cheerful in a jacket that hummed, "I have options." We sat around my dining table, which is to say the small table shoved against my kitchen wall, while they tried to make the dinner casual, like this was a normal family visit and not an ambush rehearsed in another house. Lena was the first to speak with a smile, so rehearsed it might as well have had a soundtrack. "Maya, I love what you've done with Hearth and Hands. It's such a warm space. Have you thought about making it more of a family business? I could come on as practice manager. I'd take like a 25% cut of profits, less than a contractor, but still fair, and I'd run operations so you can focus on clinical growth." Pause. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. The last thing I wanted in that moment was to laugh, but I did, because laughter is sometimes the only polite weapon left to you. Lena had once given unauthorized discounts to half of her sorority sisters. Patience, in quotes, and had lost track of coding rules so many times our billing software started to hiss like a kettle. She had twice scheduled patients incorrectly, and once thought a soap note was a brand of detergent. I could list the errors until my throat was raw. My parents, who had watched me patch gowns and move exam tables and wire lights in the reception, beamed as if this was some perfectly reasonable career pivot. They didn't see the nights I slept in my car between shifts because I couldn't afford both rent and the clinic's equipment lease. They didn't count the tens of thousands of dollars I took out in modest loans to keep the clinic solvent in year 2 when a big insurer delayed payments. They treated my hustle like a river to be redirected toward Lena's ambitions. I had rehearsed my response on the walkover because I knew the room would go for sentiment while they slipped the knife in. They expected that. Cornered by family love, I'd fold into gratitude. They expected me to say yes, or at least to negotiate. Instead, I set my napkin down with more calm than I felt, and I said, "That sounds generous." Then I slid a copy of our management services agreement across the table. The paper is smallish, legal language, stamped with the logo of Summit Care Partners, the management group I'd signed with last year to professionalize our back office and secure financing so Hearth and Hands could expand without collapsing under the weight of its own ambition. The key clause is short and merciless. No family members may hold management positions without majority board approval. It was written specifically to prevent exactly this kind of improvised takeover. Lena's smile faltered. My mother blinked. Mark's casserole fork paused midair. "Funny," I said. "I signed this because I didn't want nepotism, and because I didn't want my family to burn the thing I built. I wanted professional growth, not family drama. If anyone wants to be hired here, they apply like anyone else. We interview, we check references, and Summit reviews. I love you, but I built this for patients, not as a family side hustle." You could hear the way the room rearranged itself. The air was suddenly thinner. My parents tried the usual angles: concern, flattery, the old guilt and pride combination. But the agreement sat there like an immovable object. Lena shifted in her chair and started reciting vague managerial platitudes about bringing people together and operational streamlining. But the words had lost their power like a song that's been played too many times. They had come for a slice of what I'd built, expecting gratitude to be the currency of our relationship. They hadn't anticipated a contract, because you don't show up to a heist wearing a suit that says, "I read the bylaws." I didn't need to humiliate them. I didn't need to prove who had worked harder. The paper did the work for me. It was the practical, unromantic shield I'd put in place not because I hated my family, but because I had learned, through years of being exhausted and taken for granted, that love is not always the right operating system for a business. That night, I cooked the casserole, microwaved, not even warm, and let them leave with their feelings bruised and their plans foiled. I watched them go, and for the first time in a long while, a little of the panic that kept me awake at night loosened. The stake, I realized, wasn't just control of a clinic. It was whether the work that defined me could be stomped on by the people who asserted ownership over my life because they liked the idea of being family partners. I put the evidence on the table like a slow, impossible trick. It started as a folder, 3-ring, plain, but inside were spreadsheets, screenshots, and a ledger I'd kept because accountants sleep better when things are recorded. I slid the first page toward them. A line-by-line accounting of favors, write-offs, and family discounts that, added together, came to $42,000 in free treatments. The number felt obscene even as I read it aloud. $42,000. My voice didn't shake so much as register the calorie burn of years of endurance. Remember when I said I covered costs for family? I said. That wasn't charity theater. That was triage. I absorbed emergency treatments, covered copays, and did pro bono work for relatives when I could. But favors are supposed to be finite. This is not finite. I pointed to highlighted cells, instances where Lena had written off services for friends with a casual sorority discount, in the notes where she'd overridden billing codes because it felt simpler. There were emails from our billing vendor showing insurance denials caused by miscoded claims, and screenshots of a group chat where Lena joked about flexing friends into appointments. My parents' faces moved through stages: confusion, surprise, quick denial. Lena's defense came out like a practiced soundbite. "I wanted to help people," she said, almost proud, as if the rulebook for running other people's healthcare was a suggestion. "I only did what you would have wanted." I pointed to a separate page: unpaid personal loans to Lena, $16,450. The exactness of the number made whatever story she wanted to tell fray. I'd been quietly lending her money for years. Tuition gaps, a car down payment, until next month that turned into next semester. I had kept receipts, repayment schedules scribbled on napkins, a text thread where she promised to wire me back and then never did. The deeper cut was not money, it was the emotional ledger. I read them a passage from an old report card I'd found, one of those notes teachers write about temperament. It praised Lena for being affable and well-liked. Then I read an excerpt from a scholarship letter where I'd been commended for rigor and perseverance. My mother's mouth thinned. "We raised you both the same," she said. It was the oldest line in the book, and the one with the fewest facts. "You were always the responsible one," she said to Lena then, meaning it as praise. I understood that. But the underlying pattern had been clear to me since childhood. Charm got rewarded, work got taken for granted. I walked them through the micro-betrayals that add up into a life of being small for someone else's comfort. There were the times my parents casually rephrased my wins. "Oh, Maya's clinic? That's Lena's event space, right?" And the time they bragged about Lena's gossip network at a neighborhood party as if community influence were a credential. They'd smiled at me while telling the world that Lena was the natural people person, the one with the presence. I helped Lena move into apartments, co-signed small loans, drove her to interviews I paid for. When I pointed this out, my mother called it loyalty. When I protected myself, suddenly I was ungrateful. Lena tried a different tack, tears as argument. She recited familiar grievances, how hard it was to be judged, how she'd always tried. She said she'd make the clinic more accessible, as if accessibility were a euphemism for cutting corners. Her sincerity was performative enough to make my stomach sour. I had watched her hand out discounts like raffle tickets at a party. I had watched our accounting dashboard spike and dip because someone thought empathy meant ignoring the ledger. Running a clinic isn't a charity, and pretending otherwise is how clinics implode. When I called out specific mistakes, misfiled patient notes that required me to sit with angry families, scheduling double bookings that made a frail man wait in pain for an hour, I watched Lena's face tighten. She had once told a patient that health will follow if you just believe, then left out critical exercise instructions in the chart. I had to salvage trust after that. You get one mistake, I told her in the kitchen. You get to learn and grow if you actually learn, but you don't get to monetize my discipline with your mistakes. They tried to gaslight the numbers away. Those write-offs were you, weren't they? You're the one who signed them? Mark asked, shaking his head like a man trying to dislodge an inconvenient truth. I pointed to the timestamps and electronic signatures. No, I said. These are your handwriting and your logins. The conversation collapsed into a chorus of alternate realities, moments where memory and self-interest cross-pollinate until facts look like opinions. I wasn't seeking drama. I wanted them to see what their complacency cost me. Sleepless months rebuilding the cash flow after an audit, the panicked nights when I considered shuttering a therapy bay because payroll was due, the missed birthdays while I worked a double to pay someone else's mistake. Their entitlement had literal consequences. At the end, after the receipts were counted and the apologies tasted performative, I did something small and pointed. I told them I would begin billing family at standard rates. No more freebies without paperwork. No more family exceptions that became routine theft. I said I'd expect loans to be repaid on the schedules we agreed upon. I asked Lena to stop representing herself as a partner in Hearth and Hands. The room went quiet in a way that felt like a held breath. It wasn't victory. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a seismic reallocation of expectations. I left them with the math and the dignity of not yelling. They left with the bruise of not getting what they expected. For the first time, I felt my anger doing work for me instead of against me. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about teaching them that the thing I loved could not be used as a well for their convenience. They called it family business, like it was a compliment. I started calling it what it actually was, a liability. After the receipts and the quiet math, I could have kept a low boil, let them sulk, let them reshuffle their narratives at the grocery store. Instead, I turned the heat on in a way that felt less like vengeance and more like bookkeeping, finally getting some backbone. I did 3 practical things that read like petty revenge and like sound governance at the same time. First, I made the rules public. Not in a mean way. No social media clapback, no passive-aggressive posts, but in the clinic handbook. We printed the family policy and stapled it into new employee packets. It said plainly, family members may be patients, but they are not staff without formal hiring and board approval. All discounts require written authorization, loans will be documented, and repayment schedules enforced. The handbook ended with something I loved. Our commitment to patients comes before anyone's convenience. When I slid the new packet across my front desk, where my mother still breezed in expecting the old favors, it landed like a door closing. Evelyn read it, thumbed to the signatures page, and looked like someone who'd walked into the wrong movie. Second, I invoiced them. I didn't dramatize the numbers, I didn't do the opera of outrage, but I converted favors into formal invoices. They weren't threats, they were paperwork. A tidy breakdown, $42,000 in covered treatments, $16,450 in personal loans. I offered repayment plans with dates and direct deposit instructions. It was the most boring form of payback, financial responsibility, codified and unromantic. When Lena balked, calling me cold, I pointed out that cold and care are not the same thing. If she'd wanted charity, she could have asked when the mortgage was on my mind. Instead, she'd spent it like it was a tab. Third, and the one that felt sweetest because it was so small and so surgical, I ran the clinic like I already owned it. I tightened access controls, updated passwords, and moved the operations keys into a locked drawer at the front desk. I formalized hiring processes, scheduled interviews, and sent a polite but firm note to Summit. A heads up that familial interest had been expressed and would be handled through our standard HR pipeline. Summit sent back a perfunctory reply that felt like an insurance policy finally doing its job. Lena's plans for an informal title evaporated before she could tell another person that she was helping run the place. They tried to do the emotional work that had always been their default. There were quiet visits where Evelyn brought store-bought muffins and tried to reframe the argument as a misunderstanding about intentions. Mark would call on holidays with the practiced tone of someone trying to locate a soft corner in a wall. Lena alternated between tearful calls, "You don't understand how hard it is to be judged," and thinly veiled business pitches. "Maya, if I run community outreach, it will be good press." I would smile and repeat the same sentence every time. "If you want to work here, apply like everyone else." There was a smaller, funnier victory. Lena showed up one afternoon to stop by and see the progress. The clinic was busier than usual. New grads finishing their supervised hours, a pro bono clinic in the back, and there was a volunteer intake meeting where people sat in folding chairs and talked about recovery like it was sacred. Lena wandered into the room with the look of someone entering a set she'd expected to be an audience member in. One of the volunteers introduced herself. Grace, 27, had been a patient months ago, and she'd been invited back as a community liaison because her temperament and attention to documentation were exactly what the clinic needed. Grace smiled at Lena and said, "We've got a wait list for the outreach program. We'll need someone to run the schedule and keep the notes clean." Lena's face did the thing it always did when someone asked for competence. It hunted for an audience that would pretend the request was absurd. Lena offered instead to bring donuts. It was small, but it was deliciously symbolic. Where Lena had once traded the clinic's ledger for popularity, the clinic now rewarded the ledger. People who showed up, learned, and did the work, paid or pro bono, got to steward the thing that mattered. That was the opposite of nepotism. It was also, frankly, the exact future I'd wanted. There were hard consequences. My parents stopped showing up unannounced. They emailed instead, which felt like a downgrade for both of us. There was grief to sit with, for the versions of family we thought we had, and for the places where generosity had been treated like an endless supply. But grief doesn't mean capitulation. I learned that love needn't look like access to your business. The final scene wasn't cinematic. There was no thrown glass, no dramatic mic drop. Revenge, real, responsible revenge, was a stack of stapled pages, a polite invoice, and a locked drawer. It was Summit's neutral email confirming the bylaws and a volunteer named Grace showing up every Tuesday without drama. It was telling Lena, gently and without malice, that if she wanted to be a part of this, she'd have to earn it through qualification and consistent reliability. In the weeks that followed, I watched the clinic breathe easier. Our cash flow steadied. New grads stayed longer. I found myself with 30 minutes for dinner sometimes, luxury, and there was a strange new thing called sleep that no longer smelled faintly of dread. The revenge, in the end, was not so much to punish as to preserve. I protected the work that had protected me. I turned the family myth of ownership into a professional reality. Boundaries, accountability, rules that applied to everyone. It felt less dramatic and more durable. I had wanted for so long to be taken seriously. I discovered the most efficient way to get other people to do the same was to stop negotiating my worth at the dinner table and start enforcing it at the front desk. A year later, Hearth and Hands smells like eucalyptus and progress. We doubled into a sunlit room on the second floor, teal accent wall, better chairs in the waiting area, a bulletin board that actually gets used for community notices instead of passive-aggressive post-its. There are more clinicians with proud, scared new grad faces and fewer nights where payroll reads like a dare. Summit's financing kicked in the way contracts promise to, and then sometimes do, and someone, usually me at 7 p.m., still frowns at the accounting dashboard like it's a cryptic crossword that must be solved. Mostly, it's quieter in the way that matters. The panic that used to be the white noise of my life has been replaced by a sort of patient hum. People arriving early for appointments, a volunteer intake with a clipboard held like a talisman, Grace running outreach, and actually loving the spreadsheets. I run a pro bono clinic once a month now, and it's become one of the best days of my schedule. Watching someone graduate from hobbling to jogging in place is the kind of reward that doesn't fit into a ledger, but changes you anyway. Mentoring new grads is my favorite new job. I watch them make the same small human mistakes I did, overcompensating for uncertainty, saying too much in place of listening, and then teach them how to course correct without panicking. I've hired 2 of those volunteers full-time because competence showed up when charm didn't. Watching someone who used to be my patient become my peer is an odd, perfect circle. My parents started trying to reconnect in thoughtful, clumsy ways. Evelyn showed up one afternoon with a thrifted lamp and a card that said in handwriting that looked like practice, "I'm proud of you." She didn't bring excuses. She brought a willingness to show up on my terms. She stayed for 10 minutes, asked how she could help, and then left without expecting anything. The first time she scrubbed a coffee carafe behind the front desk, because I'd been slammed, I almost cried. Not because of the coffee, but because she had learned to do small, useful things instead of big, performative ones. Lena sent me a message months earlier. She'd taken a job at a community center 3 towns over, running a small events program. It was not the clinic. It was not the unpaid managerial title she'd floated at my dinner table. She sounded steadier when she told me she'd stopped freeloading on people's goodwill. When she came by a few weeks later with a printed offer letter and an awkward grin, I felt a complicated relief. I didn't need her to be part of this thing to want her to succeed. We talked. Short, honest sentences about accountability and about not lying by omission. She thanked me for the push that had finally made her go apply somewhere she could actually manage. I didn't throw a parade. I offered genuine congratulations. That felt like a truce more than a reconciliation, but it was quieter and truer. There were losses. Holidays with fewer bodies around the table felt like missing chapters. Some relationships stayed brittle, but new ones formed. Coworkers who become friends, volunteers who become family in a different register. The clinic community started to feel like the kind of family I would have chosen had I known how to build one sooner. People who bring their paperwork and their empathy in equal measure. The real cure, I learned, wasn't rage or invoices or even the locked drawer. The cure was a series of small, consistent choices. Showing up to work, saying no when something eroded what I'd built, and insisting that care be delivered by people who treated it like work and not a prop. Boundaries turned out to be a form of love. For myself, for my patients, and yes, for the parts of my family that could meet me on my terms. On slow evenings, I'll stand by the reception window and watch someone I helped 3 years ago walk in with a confident stride and hand a new patient my business card like it's a map. That's when the moral of the story lands. Preserving the thing you love doesn't make you selfish. It makes the work possible and the people around it safer. I didn't choose to shut people out because I wanted to be hard. I chose to keep a place where healing could happen for anyone who needed it, and only for the people who were willing to do the work to be part of it.